So you might have had the experience where you're in an art museum or you see a painting and you look at it and you're like, that's not a good painting. Maybe you can say that's a bad painting. And somebody looks at you and they say, no, that's not true. You can't say that because art is subjective. Now, I've always hated this frame of thinking where you turn subjectivity into meaning that nothing can be truly good or truly bad, or really that nothing can be good and bad. When we look at objectivity and subjectivity, these really just mean fact and opinion. Objectivity is no different than a fact, something that can be quantified or proven, with subjectivity being something that can't be proven, can't be purely quantified. So, an opinion. When it comes to something that we like or we dislike, what we're saying is we have a connection with that thing. And more deeply, we're saying that there's a story being told that I relate to on some level. Now, this applies to art, this applies to music, this applies to movies. You can use this in so many different genres. So let's take the art example first. Now, the painter can tell you a story by making a narrative in the painting. You see something happening in the painting. If that's a story that on some level you relate to or connect to, you might like that painting. On the other hand, it can be dumbed down into very simple states where you only need colors or shapes to connect with somebody. And that's why abstract painting is still telling a story, even if it isn't a purely narrative story. Now, with subjectivity being a little bit better described, we can look at two main aspects that make something better or worse, even in subjective terms. First, we're going to talk about breadth. Breadth is the scope of how many people connect with your thing, how many people have some type of connection to the story you're telling. And depth is how deeply they do connect to that story that's being told. So we got this chart right here. On the very far end of the breadth side, you'd have some type of connection with everybody, but a very shallow connection. And on the depth side, you'd have a very deep connection with very few people. Now, having a higher number in either of these directions doesn't necessarily make your thing better. And let me explain that. For some things, like high fashion, high art, it's almost like an exclusive club that your thing has to be out there enough, has to push boundaries to a certain amount to get the validity needed for these groups. So they would go in the low breadth, high depth category. So this category, this is where you get your cult followings. People feel something very strongly towards this thing, towards this story. And the fact that not a lot of people know about it and that not a lot of people understand it add to the value of the story itself. This is why you get multi-million-dollar paintings of black squares. This is why you see dresses made of tires that nobody would ever wear on the street. And this also is part of the reason why we like finding musicians and artists early before they have this huge following. It's that we feel the connection early and we feel like we're a part of that exclusive club. Now, if we go far on the breadth scale, we have to get somebody or some story that connects to almost anybody, but doesn't have a crazy amount of depth. Now, the best example I can think of when it comes to this section is something lighthearted that everybody kind of likes. So some memes would go in this category, cool stunt videos, anything that would get passed around at a party and never thought about again. Now, if we go to the very end of the chart, we get the max breadth and the max depth. This is where you get tons and tons of diehard fans. The best example I can think of off my head has to be Taylor Swift. Now, she has millions and millions of absolutely diehard fans. And at this breadth, it's extremely difficult to connect on such a deep level. But the story she's telling is something that relates to so many different people that she's able to get this huge audience who feel like they know exactly the story she's telling and they connect with that story. Now, here's where subjective measures differ the most from objective measures. Success is not achieving the max breadth and then max depth. Success is more centered around what your goal is if you're trying to connect deeply with people, if you're trying to connect with a lot of people, or if you want to do both. Now, the high-end fashion and art aren't worse or better than Taylor Swift. And in the same vein, Taylor Swift isn't necessarily better or worse than the high art. So the measure of if your thing is subjectively good or bad is not based on just the thing, but how far away your thing is compared to your goal for the thing. If you want to connect with everybody very deeply, but you're connecting with very few people very shallowly, then you're not winning. Then this isn't success. So you have to take into account your goals for your subjective thing, where you want to be versus where you are. And at the end of the day, subjectivity is pretty lit. Give this a like and subscribe if you found it at all helpful, and I'll see you back soon. Peace.